When starting tomato seeds, timing is everything. Start a little too late, and I know that my plants might not have time to set fruit before the worst of the extreme heat sets in, causing pollination issues and a whole host of other heat stress related problems. And then for those in colder climates with short growing seasons, if you start too late, the plants might not have time to set fruit at all before the frost arrives in the fall. So, conversely, though, starting too early will result in plants growing way too large in their starter pots before outdoor conditions are safe for transplant, and that usually occurs here in the Sacramento Valley around the middle of April. So, plants that languish a little too long in their starter pots under grow lights can develop all manner of issues that can adversely affect their growth or even just outright kill them. I learned this the hard way last year when I started my tomatoes way too early.
Last winter, I upgraded my grow light setup, increasing both my seed starting space while also adding additional light fixtures to the rack. It didn't dawn on me that more lights might affect growth rate, so I started my tomato seeds at the beginning of February as usual, only to be surprised at how fast everything grew. By the beginning of March, the starts were getting huge in their pots, and as they did, some issues began to develop. For example, these Cherokee purple starts developed a fatal case of edema, which is the result of plant cells not being able to sufficiently aspire moisture, which in turn results in cell rupture. One of the contributing factors to edema is overcrowding. As plants grow big, overcrowding on the limited space of a grow light rack becomes inevitable.
Also, grow lights, at least the kinds of grow lights that I can afford, are great for small to medium sized plants, but they really struggle to provide enough energy as plants get larger to, say, maybe a foot or taller. And what can happen if you leave them under grow lights as they start to get huge? Leaves might begin to yellow, lower branches may fall off entirely, and sometimes they can recover from this, but other times the issues can be fatal. Ultimately, my tomato plants last year rallied and they did just fine. I think I got something like 400 pounds out of them all, not to brag. But it was really touch and go there at the beginning. So this year, I'm determined to avoid the same mistake. So in early November, what I did was I seeded a pair of sacrificial tomatoes, set them under my grow lights at about 16 hours on, 8 hours off, and I tracked exactly how long I'm going to need for my starts to get to a point where I'm confident that I can safely transplant them outside as soon as conditions allow, which again, here in Sacramento, that's typically mid April.
5 days after planting, the seedlings began to emerge. This is about average for a tomato. At 10 days, the first true leaves have emerged. These are the multi-pointed ones up above the cotyledons. At day 15, growth has really taken off. Plant's about 3 inches tall at this point. At day 20, the plant is still going strong. I've thinned out the second seedling in the cup at this point. Here we are at day 25, and some issues have started to show. You'll notice that the lower branches on both plants have turned a combination of yellow and purple. This is typically indicative of a potassium and phosphorus deficiency. There's no need to freak out about this yet. This can usually be resolved by appropriately fertilizing, which is what I did. I made up a water-soluble fertilizer tea and applied it. Here's the same plant 2 days after applying the water-soluble general-purpose fertilizer. Those two lower branches are definitely a goner, so I'm just going to remove those. This really isn't anything to worry about. I've actually planted tomatoes before that did fine, and they looked like little miniature palm trees when they went in the ground. As long as you have good, healthy growth at the top of the plant and the plant is otherwise healthy, the loss of some lower branches doesn't really matter. All right, day 30. The plant is now just about 6 inches tall, doing fine. Seems to be recovering just fine from its prior nutrient deficiency. And day 35, the plants are getting big, looking nice and healthy. Honestly, at this point, I would feel pretty comfortable transplanting these out into the garden, assuming outdoor conditions were safe to do so. Even if I wasn't ready to plant out into the garden at this point, I would probably move these onto our sunny, warm patio to begin sun hardening, and they would basically live on the patio during the day and then live in the garage at night for a few days to a week or two. Any buds that develop at this point are going to get picked off. I want the plant to still focus on growth, not on developing fruit yet. At day 40, the plants are looking perfect. This is really about as long as I would want to leave these under the grow lights before taking them outside, even if I'm not ready to plant. My experience has been that if you let them get any bigger than this under the grow lights, they start to really develop a lot of problems. At this point, the plant just really needs genuine sunlight and maybe a little extra root space. Here I'm going to demonstrate one of the neat features or characteristics, rather, of tomato plants. Typically, when you seed tomatoes in their starter pots, you plant more than one seed per pot. This is to accommodate fluctuations in germination rates so that you at least get one plant per pot growing. But more often than not, you'll get two, maybe three tomato plants per pot. And at some point, you're going to have to thin them out. It will seem like kind of a shame to just discard these perfectly healthy tomato plants. And you know what? You don't have to. This process actually works a little better with a somewhat smaller, somewhat younger tomato plant, but it works okay with a plant this size as well. All you're going to do is cut the plant off, place the stem in a jar of water, and wait for 5 to maybe 7 days. After a few days, you'll start to see adventitious roots beginning to sprout out of the stem of the tomato plant. You don't really want to let the rootlets get much bigger than what you're seeing here. If you do, you risk breaking them and damaging them when you plant this in another pot of soil. And that's all we're going to do is make a little hole in the soil in this starter pot here and pop the stem in. Now you can skip the step of putting the tomato in a jar of water or cup of water for a few days and just put the stem right into some damp soil. My personal experience has been that I have a little bit of a greater success rate if I propagate the roots in water before planting like this. Here's the same plant 9, maybe 10 days later. As you can see, it's pretty healthy looking. There's a couple crispy spots on the leaves, but this whole process is, inflicting quite a bit of stress, so some damage is bound to occur. Out of curiosity, let's just take a look and see how the root system is doing. Now, if I was really interested in planting this out into the garden, I would have given the root ball a little more time to develop. But seeing as how this is really just for demonstration purposes, let's shake it out and take a look. Now, given time and proper care, this plant would have developed into something that would have produced plenty of fruit. I've had great luck doing this many times in the past. I kept the second plant I started as part of this experiment indoors under grow lights for the better part of 2 months, just to show how sickly plants can get if left under grow lights for too long. As you can see, the top leaves here are yellow, not looking so great, and a number of branches beneath it have shriveled up and fallen away. Now, granted, this plant might recover and produce fruit. Tomatoes are remarkably resilient when it comes to recovering from physical damage. But this is really more or less living proof of why you have to be careful not to start your plants too early. If you can't get them out before the plant hits this point here, you could be in trouble.
So what's the takeaway here? It's looking like I really only need to start my tomatoes 30 to maybe 40 days ahead of my anticipated mid-April transplant date. So I'm thinking that I'll give my starts about 30 days under the lights, and then maybe another week or two out on our sunny, warm patio where they'll live during the day, moving them into the garage at night so they can gradually become acclimated to outdoor conditions. It's really looking like I won't have to start them until March 1st. Now, it's important to point out that this time frame really only applies to my specific grow light setup, and grow times will vary depending on light intensity and room temperature. Honestly, I encourage everyone starting plants under grow lights to conduct a similar trial, and you might be surprised at how much time you don't need. And that'll do it for today. Until next time, let's hope it all doesn't die.